Hey YouTube, Do-It-Yourself Junkie 369, and today I'm going to be tapping a piece of this AEX for the tie down point on the tail cone for my RV10 build. And the reason I'm breaking this out in a separate video is last time I attempted it, I broke a tap, ruined a part, and injured myself. And if you're not aware of that, you can go check out this link here and watch that video. In this video, I'm going to show you the correct way to do it. Now, in the step, you are supposed to cut the piece to length, cut this angle in it, tapped that end to 3/8 16th inch. What I would recommend is before you do all that cutting, run the tap in there and cut the threads in the piece. And the reason for that is if something goes wrong, for example like mine, the tap broke and I stripped out the threads. You probably won't be able to see it in the video, but there's about 1/4 inch of no threads, and then there is some threads, and those look pretty horrible too. Well, when that happened, I could have backed the tap out of there, removed the broken pieces, and then chopped off this end, bought a new tap, and made a second attempt at it. But because I already cut this to length, it's not possible. If I slice off the portion with the bad threads in it, the piece will now be too small. If I tap beforehand, I can screw up until I run out of this distance. But this time around, I should show you steps that will allow you to not screw it up at all, and that won't be a problem. But it's better to err on the side of caution and do that operation first, cutting the threads. That way if something does go wrong, it's just an easy task of slicing off the bad portion and you still have a usable piece instead of ruining it and then having to order a new one. Plus, you're more likely to mess up the tapping process than you are the cutting it to length process and adding this angled cut to it. You should be comfortable enough by now that that's simple, and as long as you don't mark in the wrong spot, you'll end up with correct cuts. Now, first thing I would recommend is you get some good HSS taps. The ones I bought are made by Hurdle. I've used their drill bits and loved them. I wish I could buy an entire set, but sadly it's about $300 to $450 for an entire large set of Hurdle drill bits. This set comes with 3 taps. You have a taper tap, a plug tap, and then what's known as a bottoming tap. And basically the difference between them is how many threads lead in occur before you reach the full cut on the thread. So I didn't realize it at the time, even though I've cut threads with taps before, but I was using a tap like this, which is not a good tap to be using for this process. I would recommend starting with either the taper tap, the most ideal, or the plug tap. And then after you've cut a certain amount of distance or almost all the way to your complete depth, then you can go back and chase the threads with this tap to kind of finish cut the threads that weren't cut all the way with the lead-in cutting surface here, and basically get more of those threads in that hole cut to full depth. This is also good for threading all the way down into the bottom of a blind hole, which doesn't occur or apply to this procedure. But you want to always start with one of these two and then switch to this one after you have several threads worth of engagement. Next thing is get a good tap handle. I had a tap handle. It was Great Neck brand. I can't speak to whether or not that's a good brand or not. I've used that tap set for a really long time. The taps, that's the first one I've had break, but that's also one of the few bottoming taps out of the set that I've used. All the others seem to be mostly plug taps, but the tap handle that was included with the set, this area here rounded off and would no longer grab the shank of the tap correctly any longer. And so instead of having a lot of torque by having handles out here and having my hands far away from the tap, I was using this to grip the tap, and then I had my hand resting on top of it. And if you watch the video, you see the obvious results. When the tap breaks, my hand's right there to plunge into it with a nice twisting motion added to cause a cut. So don't use this. Get the proper tap handle. If you have a tap handle that's not gripping your tap, buy a new one. Don't use the wrench or vice grips or anything of the such. Last thing you want to do is you want to use some sort of lubricant, especially with aluminum, because the threads will want to gall and tear out if you don't use a lubricant. In my video, I was using oil, so I was trying to do it properly in that respect. Reading some into it, it seems like I should have gone with a thinner fluid, such as soap and water would be okay, or even WD-40. And I can't imagine it makes that much difference, but one tip that I saw online in forums frequented by machinists said, don't use a thick lubricant, use something thin for working with aluminum. For steel, which is what I've mainly worked with in the past, oil was probably the way to go, and aluminum is quite a bit different from cutting on steel, even when using hand taps. So this time I have some WD-40. If I run out of that, I'll probably try using this 3-in-1. Last thing, I was browsing through Vans Air Force, and one of the forums, the guy was talking about he had snapped a tap off in the mounting point for his tie down and one of his quick build wings, and trying to figure out what to do next. But somebody had mentioned that you just throw this in there and tap it. The hole's already at the correct size. I don't know, maybe his was. It sounds highly unlikely, but depending on material being tapped, diameter of tap, and thread count of your tap, so in this case we're doing 3/8 with 16 threads per inch, you want to go to a drill chart and look up what size this hole needs to be. I've already done that, but you should verify it for yourself. It should be 5/16, right? 5/16. And what that does is it properly sizes the hole in aluminum for you to get 75% thread engagement. No threads are ever interlocking at 100% engagement. It would be too tight. In steel, usually you're looking at 50% engagement. So, to get that fit, this hole needs to be 5/16 in diameter, and I can tell you right now that it is not, so I highly recommend getting a 5/16 drill bit and drilling that out a little ways past what you plan to, past the depth that you plan to tap it to. In this case, we're tapping to a depth of 1.25 inches. So I marked on my drill bit 1.5 inches to make sure that when this line hits the end of the material that I have drilled far enough into the piece. And really I would probably go a little bit past 1.5 inches even, possibly, due to the taper in the end of the bit. So really the point I want to measure is from here to here, not the point to here. On this bit, that is about 1/8 of an inch between the tip and the edge here where it's actually cutting the full diameter and it's not the taper. So my 1.5 inches still gives me about 1/8 of an inch past the point that I should be cutting threads. And same thing with tapping, you want to use some sort of lubricant while drilling that hole. And that just helps with cutting. It's not so much heat. It can be if the cutting operation is fast enough, but it's more of just clearing chips out and helping to clear those chips out while you're cutting to make the process easier. Okay, missed it there because I had the camera adjusted wrong, but I sprayed some WD-40 and then went in with the drill bit, starting outside the workpiece, full speed, down to the line on my drill bit, and then back out. And now using my taper tap, I'm going to cut the threads into the part. And another thing here that I did mention in the last video is you want to go in maybe about 1/4 turn and then back 1/4 turn to break any chips loose. Or 1/4 turn and then 1/8 turn to break chips loose. And it shouldn't really be any force. I mean, I'm literally using just the tips of my fingers and applying light pressure. Then after a little bit, add more WD-40. And it was starting to get a little bit harder and harder to cut. So I'm backing the tap all the way out. And basically all those chips that I've collected on that, I'm going to use an air hose to spray them off. Since there's a hole all the way through, you can just use the air hose to spray down inside and clear out the chips from in there too. Now that I have my threads started and going very well, I can use the tape measure on this tap and get a rough idea of how far I'm going to cut into the material. So it's going to be 1.25 inches. I will just go ahead and mark a couple flutes on the tap, and when those get level with the material, I know that I've cut deep enough, and then all I have to worry about is cleaning up the threads that are not fully cut because of the lead-in of the tap. Okay, and now I'm at depth. I'm probably going to do 1 extra turn just to make sure. And I ended up doing 2. Just, I want to make sure that there's no way I haven't tapped this deep enough. And If you compare this to the other video, which I'll probably insert a little bit of it here, you can see the effort that I'm putting into turning this is a lot easier and a lot smoother than what I was doing. And that comes down to how it should have been versus how it was when I ended up snapping the tap. And I should have known better, especially with my previous experience. But I kept going and ended up ruining the part and hurting myself. So hopefully this will keep you from making the same mistake. And I believe between this and the handle I spent close to $50. And that might seem high for some of you people. But the quality of having a sharp tap that can easily make that cut makes it worth it. And the threads that it left behind are pristine. They are some of the best looking threads I've ever seen. So in this one case, normally I'm all for saving money. In this case, I feel like $50 is money well spent when it comes to purchasing these taps and cutting these threads. So I went ahead and I marked my depth on this tap. And before we get too deep in there, we'll add some WD-40. Really here at the beginning, there shouldn't be any cutting until we get down to, I believe it was about 8 threads from the end. And right there I can feel some added resistance. So we're cutting through threads that have been partially cut from the lead-in on the other tap. So now we just go back to our quarter turn reverse to break the chips. Add a little bit more WD-40 just to be sure. And as I get lower and lower, the threads are less and less cut, and I'm getting more and more resistance. And right there, we are just past the line that I marked, and we're definitely at a full cut into the aluminum. So basically there's no more lead-in from our previous tap, and we're definitely just past the line, so we're deep enough, and now we can back this tap off, spray the part off, clean it of any oil, and install it. And that's probably going to be part of the other video that I'm shooting right now. I'm putting this right hand skin on the tail cone. I'll take a break from that to complete that complete steps 1, 2, and 3 on page 2 that I passed over while I was waiting on this part to come in. Which is basically building up the F1012 bulkhead that I'm about to need Okay, so now that part's complete, the only thing left to do is to shape it, which is still part of step 1 where I left off. I'm going to go in, basically deburr this edge just a hair where I cut the threads, cut in my angles, cut it to length, clean all the oil off of it, and it's ready to go. And that will be part of finishing up the bulkhead F1012, which I'll be doing in the video that I'm shooting right now, where I was putting on the right hand skin on the tail cone. But I will take a break from that and go back to finish steps 1, 2, and 3 on page 2, which I passed over while waiting for this replacement part to come in. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this keeps you from breaking a tap or hurting yourself or ruining a part like I did. If you like the video, hit a thumbs up. Think about subscribing. If you're going to buy your own kit, check out my builder's number below. If you submit that when you buy your kit, Vans will send me $100 as kind of a referral. It costs nothing for you. If you want to get my up-to-date build log, that's also linked in the description below, and it has stuff like how much I've spent, tools that I've been using, and a breakdown of like how many rivets in each section or sub-kit, how much time I spent on that sub-kit. And basically it's an up-to-date exactly where I am, since the video's lag a little bit behind. And thanks for watching.